Before her passing, Loretta Swit, the legendary actress who portrayed Major Margaret Hot Lips Houlihan, left fans in shock with her candid revelations about MASH and the heartbreaking truth behind why so many of her co-stars walked away from the show that defined a generation. For years, MASH was considered untouchable. It was the rare TV series that combined sharp wit, raw emotion, and the sobering realities of war. It ran for 11 seasons and became one of the most beloved shows in American television history. But behind the laughter, the awards, and the fame was a growing darkness, exhaustion, conflict, and emotional strain that few could understand unless they lived it. Loretta Swit spent years defending the show, calling it the proudest work of her career. But before her final years, she opened up about the truth, about what really drove her friends and co-stars to leave one by one. And according to her, it wasn't greed, ego, or simple burnout. It was something far deeper, something heartbreaking. She spoke of Alan Alda's internal battle, a man adored by fans, yet quietly haunted by the show's emotional weight. She revealed that Wayne Rogers, who played Trapper John, didn't leave because of money, as tabloids once claimed. It was because he felt his character was fading into Alda's shadow, his voice in the series growing quieter by the season. Then there was McLean Stevenson, the beloved Colonel Blake, whose exit shocked viewers. Loretta recalled his tearful confession before leaving. He wanted more. He wanted to lead. But MASH's hierarchy, both on-screen and off, didn't leave much room. His departure left a scar that never truly healed, for him or for the fans. And perhaps the most painful revelation of all was how the cast's closeness became both their strength and their downfall. Loretta said it felt like a family trapped in the fog of war, fiction bleeding into reality. "We were living that chaos," she admitted. "You can't spend 12 hours a day pretending to save lives in a war zone without carrying some of that home with you." From the outside, MASH looked unstoppable. The series had everything: wit, humanity, humor, and a cast that brought life to every line. It wasn't just a TV show. It was a cultural phenomenon. But behind the camera, the people who made it work were slowly being crushed under the weight of its greatness. Loretta Swit, who played the fierce yet deeply emotional Major Margaret Hot Lips Houlihan, lived through every moment of it. And in her later reflections, she revealed how that weight, the demand for perfection, began to tear the cast apart. In the early days, MASH was fresh and fearless. It was new territory, tackling the horrors of war through laughter, blending comedy and tragedy in a way no show had dared before. The cast, led by Alan Alda, Wayne Rogers, and McLean Stevenson, became a family almost instantly. Loretta often said that during those first seasons, there was a sense of magic in the air, a feeling that they were creating something truly important. But as the show's fame skyrocketed, the magic turned into pressure. Producers, networks, and audiences all wanted MASH to stay perfect. Each episode had to be powerful, funny, and politically relevant. Alan Alda, who played Hawkeye Pierce, found himself taking on more than any actor should. He wasn't just the star, he was also writing and directing episodes, shaping the tone and soul of the series. Swit recalled that Alda's commitment was unmatched, but so was his exhaustion. "Alan carried the show on his back," she said. "He gave everything to it. But carrying that deeply that long comes at a cost. That cost began to show. The once lighthearted energy on set grew heavier each year. Scenes that were supposed to be funny started feeling emotionally draining. We weren't just acting," Loretta said. "We were living those emotions. Every joke about death, every laugh in the middle of chaos, it was real." The emotional toll wasn't the only issue. Creative frustration was brewing, especially among the supporting cast. Wayne Rogers, who played Trapper John, began feeling like his character was fading into the background as Alda's influence grew. While the two respected each other deeply, Rogers couldn't ignore the imbalance. "Wayne wanted to be heard," Swit explained. "He wasn't angry, he was just heartbroken that his character wasn't getting the attention it deserved." When Rogers left after season 3, it stunned both fans and castmates. The public was told it was a contract issue, but Loretta later revealed that it was more personal. Rogers felt his creative voice was being lost, and he didn't want to stay in a situation where he couldn't grow. He loved MASH, she said softly, but he loved his dignity more. Then came McLean Stevenson, the beloved Colonel Henry Blake. He had the same yearning, to stretch himself as an actor, to explore new roles. But Loretta recalled that McLean's decision to leave was filled with regret even before he made it. He wanted to be a leading man, she said. He thought he'd find more opportunities if he left. But part of him knew. He was walking away from lightning in a bottle. Stevenson's departure devastated the cast. His death episode, one of the most famous in TV history, left everyone in tears, not just on screen, but behind it. "We cried for real," Loretta said. "Because we weren't just losing a character. We were losing a friend." By that point, the atmosphere on set had shifted completely. What was once a family bound by laughter had become a group of weary artists trying to carry the emotional weight of a war they were only pretending to fight. Loretta said, "It's strange. We were making a show about doctors and nurses breaking under pressure, and we were doing the same thing. In the end, MASH's greatness became both its blessing and its burden. The success that made it immortal also drained the very people who gave it life. And as Loretta Swit looked back years later, she admitted that the cracks that began with Wayne and McLean never truly healed. They were the first signs that this masterpiece, no matter how brilliant, couldn't last forever. As MASH marched through its later seasons, the laughter that once filled the set started sounding different. It wasn't the sound of carefree joy anymore. It was the laughter of people holding back exhaustion. Loretta Swit often said that MASH wasn't just a show. It was an experience that consumed their lives. "We weren't just co-workers," she explained. "We were living together, breathing the same air, and sharing the same emotions for more than a decade. It felt like a family. And like any family, we started to break under the weight of time." By the late 1970s, the series had become one of the most celebrated shows in television history. But its success came with an invisible cost. The cast had been portraying characters stuck in the chaos of the Korean War for years, but emotionally it began to feel like they were the ones trapped there. Day after day, they rehearsed scenes of trauma, heartbreak, and loss, then went home and tried to shake it off. Most couldn't. Loretta once admitted that by the 7th season, we weren't acting anymore. We were reacting to fatigue, to memories, to everything we'd built and lost along the way. Jamie Farr, who played the cross-dressing Corporal Klinger, used to joke that he'd been wearing dresses longer than most women in Hollywood. But even his humor couldn't hide the fatigue setting in. Loretta said Farr would often stay behind after takes, sitting quietly on set once the lights went off. "He was the funniest man alive," she said. "But some days even Jamie didn't have the energy to laugh. The constant emotional intensity affected everyone differently." Alan Alda's perfectionism grew, not from ego, but from the pressure of knowing that millions of people were watching and expecting brilliance. Loretta admired his dedication, but she also saw the toll it took. "Alan was our anchor," she said. "But even anchors rust if they're left in the water too long." Then came the turning point, the departure of McLean Stevenson, whose on-screen death as Colonel Henry Blake still remains one of television's most shocking moments. Loretta recalled that filming the scene where the characters learned Blake's plane was shot down felt too real. "We didn't need to act," she said. "We were already broken." After that episode, something inside the cast changed permanently. The laughter was still there, but now it carried the weight of loss. The show went on, of course, it had to, but the dynamic was never quite the same. Loretta compared it to a family after losing its heart. Wayne Rogers' earlier exit had already created ripples, but McLean's departure made everyone painfully aware of their own emotional limits. "Every goodbye on MASH felt like losing a limb," Loretta said. "You kept moving, but it was never the same." Despite the sadness, the remaining cast members pushed forward, determined to honor what they'd built. Yet the longer the show continued, the more it mirrored the fatigue of the soldiers they portrayed. Filming 12 hours a day, 5 days a week, in grueling conditions, under fake heat lamps to simulate Korean weather, began to wear them down physically as well. Some actors developed chronic exhaustion. Others withdrew emotionally. Loretta admitted she often went home and cried, unsure if she was crying for Margaret Houlihan or for herself. Still, there were moments of light. The deep friendships among the cast, especially between Loretta, Alan Alda, Mike Farrell, and Harry Morgan, kept them going. They shared meals, jokes, and quiet moments of understanding. "We held each other up," she said. "We had to, because if one of us fell, the whole thing would crumble." Looking back, Loretta described those middle seasons as both the most rewarding and the most painful period of her career. The show was peaking in popularity, winning awards and changing television forever. But behind those triumphs were sleepless nights, tears in the makeup trailer, and hugs that lingered too long. By the end of the decade, the cast wasn't just tired, they were emotionally drained. Yet they stayed, not because they had to, but because they loved MASH. "It wasn't about fame anymore," Loretta said. "It was about finishing something we started, even if it broke us in the process." On screen, the cast of MASH seemed like one big, inseparable family. Their chemistry was natural, their humor effortless, their affection genuine. But behind the camera, tensions slowly brewed, not out of hatred, but out of creative passion and fatigue that had built up over years of working side by side under immense pressure. Loretta Swit, always honest and introspective, later revealed that the most painful conflicts on MASH weren't loud arguments or ego-driven feuds. They were quiet disagreements that lingered like unspoken wounds. By the mid-1970s, MASH had evolved from a simple wartime comedy into something far more profound, a statement on humanity, loss, and morality. Much of that shift came from Alan Alda, whose growing role as both actor and creative voice began to shape the show's identity. Loretta admired him deeply, but she admitted that not everyone agreed with the new direction. "Alan wanted the show to mean something," she said. "He wanted people to think, not just laugh. But that kind of vision comes with resistance. Some writers and cast members worried that the show was losing its comedic edge, becoming too serious and message-driven." Loretta remembered long nights when scripts were rewritten on the spot, debates flaring over how much emotion was too much. "We were trying to balance humor and heartbreak," she said, "but sometimes it felt like we were walking on a wire." Wayne Rogers had been the first casualty of that creative tension. He wanted more say in how Trapper John was portrayed, but his requests often went unheard. "He didn't leave angry," Loretta explained. "He left disappointed, and that's worse." McLean Stevenson faced a similar dilemma. He longed for more screen time and control over his character's development. Loretta said that both men left not because they didn't love MASH, but because they couldn't live with how it was changing. Even Loretta herself wasn't immune to the struggles. Her character, Major Margaret Houlihan, was written at first as a comic stereotype, a strict, lovesick nurse constantly chasing the affection of men. But Swit wanted more. "Margaret was so much deeper than that," she said. "She was a leader, a survivor, a woman in a man's world." Loretta began pushing for more emotional range, and she got it. Over the years, Margaret evolved from a one-dimensional punchline into one of television's most respected female characters. But that evolution didn't come easily. "I had to fight for her humanity," Loretta admitted. "And sometimes that fight meant pushing back against the very people I loved working with." Alan Alda supported her transformation, but some executives didn't. They worried that giving Margaret too much depth would take away from the show's comedic balance. Loretta stood firm, telling them, "She's not a joke. She's a soldier." Eventually, they relented, and fans noticed. Margaret Houlihan became a symbol of resilience, compassion, and strength, and Loretta won 2 Emmy Awards for her work. But even victories like that came with emotional cost. The creative battles, though never explosive, created quiet divisions. Some actors felt drained by the heavy moral themes Alda wanted to explore. Others embraced it wholeheartedly. Mike Farrell, who joined as B.J. Honeycutt, once said that by the final seasons, every episode felt like a statement. And that's a lot to carry for a comedy. Loretta later said those disagreements were never about fame or money. "We loved each other too much for that," she explained. It was about vision. We wanted to make something meaningful. We just didn't always agree on what that meant. The production itself didn't make things easier. The long days, grueling hours, and emotional scripts began to wear everyone thin. Crew members would cry after certain takes, overwhelmed by the emotional intensity. We had moments, Loretta recalled, where the line between acting and reality just disappeared. By the time the show reached its later seasons, the conflicts had mellowed, replaced by a kind of weary respect. Everyone knew the end was near, and that realization softened the edges of old disagreements. "We'd fought, we'd laughed, we'd cried," she said. "In the end, all that mattered was that we'd done something extraordinary." Loretta often summed it up best. "The conflicts weren't what broke us. They're what made us real. Without them, MASH wouldn't have had its heart." When MASH finally came to an end in 1983, it was more than just the conclusion of a television series. It was the closing of a chapter in American culture. For over a decade, the cast had lived together like a second family, surviving the long days, the laughter, and the heartbreak that came with telling stories about war, compassion, and survival. The finale, Goodbye, Farewell, and Amen, wasn't just another episode. It was a global event. More than 100 million people tuned in to say goodbye. But behind the smiles and tears on screen, the emotions of the cast were painfully real. Loretta Swit, in her final reflections, said that filming the finale felt like living through an actual goodbye, the kind that leaves a hole in your heart. "We cried all day," she recalled. "Every scene, every word felt final. It was like watching your life fade in slow motion." For years, the cast had laughed through tears, but that day the laughter stopped. The show that had carried them through the highs and lows of their careers was over. As the cameras stopped rolling, silence filled the set. No one moved. Alan Alda, who had directed the finale, hugged each cast member in turn, unable to speak. "We didn't need words," Loretta said softly. "We all knew what it meant. It wasn't just the end of MASH. It was the end of an era, the end of shared mornings, inside jokes, and emotional breakdowns between takes." "We had grown up together," she explained. "And that day it felt like growing up was over." The farewell hit Loretta harder than she expected. She'd spent 11 years becoming Major Margaret Houlihan, learning from her, defending her, even healing through her. Walking away from that character was like losing a part of herself. "She was my best friend," Loretta admitted. "She made me stronger." Saying goodbye to her was harder than anything I've ever done. For weeks after filming wrapped, Loretta said she couldn't bring herself to watch the finale. Even years later, rewatching clips brought back a wave of emotion. "It was too real," she confessed. "We weren't acting. When you see those tears, they're ours. But while the show ended beautifully, not every wound healed easily. Some cast members struggled to adjust to life after MASH. The constant camaraderie they'd known for years was suddenly gone. The daily routines, the laughter on set, the long hours spent in each other's company, all replaced by silence. "It's strange," Loretta once said. "You spend more time with these people than your own family, and then one day, it just stops. You don't know who you are without it." Despite that pain, the love between the cast never faded. They stayed close, checking in on each other through the years, attending reunions, and celebrating milestones together. Loretta often spoke fondly of her bond with Alan Alda, a friendship that lasted decades. "We've shared something no one else ever will," she said. "We went through a kind of emotional war together." Before her passing, Loretta looked back on MASH, not with regret, but with gratitude, even for the heartbreak. "We didn't just make television," she said. "We made history. We made people laugh in their darkest hours. That's something I'll always carry with me." When asked what truly caused so many of her friends and co-stars to leave the show over the years, her answer was simple but profound. It wasn't fame or ego. It was love. We cared too much. We gave too much. And eventually there was nothing left to give. Those words capture the spirit of MASH perfectly. A show that taught the world about compassion, humanity, and the beauty of imperfection. It reminded people that even in chaos, laughter can heal, but healing always comes with a price. Loretta Swit's final reflections became a love letter to her cast, her fans, and the show that defined her life. "We said goodbye on screen," she said, "but in our hearts, we never really left that camp. And perhaps that's why MASH still matters. Because behind every joke, every tear, and every goodbye, there was truth. A truth that Loretta Swit carried until her final days. The show ended, but the love never did.